when I was at Concordia in Milwaukee, and there I was a senior in high school. There was a man who came, a young man, whose name was James Barber. And he taught the class that otherwise had never been there, and when he left, never was there again. But it was in creative writing. Barber had short, reddish blonde hair. His face had been ravaged with some kind of a terrible case of acne when he was younger, and so it was rumpled. He spoke in a kind of a high voice, slowly. I thought the man was wonderful. He used to sit on a chair like this, here. In front of the classroom, he sat on a chair like this always, smoking. In those days, people smoked. And it didn't bother him at all to smoke in the classroom. And in fact, one day all the students came. In those days, they used to have a little pen, ballpoint pen, that looked exactly like a filter-tipped cigarette. When you pulled the white from the filter, there was the pen. And you put it back in again. All my classmates came with those little fake cigarettes hanging out of their mouths. He asked me later what they meant by that. He was concerned that they had meant to mock him. I said, oh, no. They like you. I didn't say this, but he was free. He had a kind of freedom that the classmates liked. And these classmates were just the Dickens. This is an all-male school. This is an all-male class. They were the Dickens on their teachers. They knew how to saw them down to size, and I am not kidding. We had a history teacher whose name was Krog, very short little fellow. K-R-O-G. He taught us history. I don't even remember what period it was. He also had a high voice, but his was kind of nasal and squeaky. And so they called him Gork. My classmates called him Gork. And as he would come down the hall, busily carrying his bag, they would say, beep, beep, Gork. This is not kind. They could knock people down. There was another professor we had, and this is in the sophomore year, who taught us geometry. His name was Barr. And this man was absolutely deep-sixed. And this tells you a little bit about how cruel. And this is a boarding school, and these kinds of things exist. And for this, there must be apologies. George Firehammer, who often was the leader in this sort of a thing, came up with a phrase one day during class, and he whispered it. He said, Barr beats his wife. And he kept saying it, Barr beats his wife. Barr beats his wife. Over and over again, and so other boys in the class started saying the same thing. Barr beats his wife. Barr beats his wife. And I remember the poor man, they all have high voices, but his was womanish. He pleaded with this class. He said, how can you be preparing for the ministry and talk like this? Barr beats his wife. Barr beats his wife, they kept on saying. And I know they did this more than once because finally it broke him. Now I would have, I think, in his place, left the room, just gone out, but he didn't. There was a piano in the back of this classroom, and that's where I sat. I was W. He came back to the piano, and he sat on the bench, and he bowed his head. And I saw that he was crying. Back to Barber. The second story that we wrote, Barber had the habit of returning stories by walking among the desks and plopping them down and plopping them down. I remember his returning that second story that we wrote. Oh, he sat like this for a reason. I asked him about that one day, and he said, it's because I have a carbuncle on my butt. And it hurts if I sit on it. This is a free man. I mean, this man really deserved respect. He dropped my story last on my desk. And as he turned and walked toward the front of the room, he said these words exactly. You do not forget words like this if you're going to become a storyteller or a writer. He said, Wangerin can write the eyes out of a turkey at 50 paces. I hardly knew what that meant, but it was wonderful. I mean, it was as if he had knighted me as a writer, struck me on both of my shoulders with his words. And the wonder of it was, he didn't talk down. He spoke at exactly the level of his own thought, as if we could all follow that exactly. And I know now what he meant, because I remember that story. Successful stories I do not forget. He meant that I get the details absolutely right. In this story, there was a husband and a wife. And at one point, the husband stands behind his wife, who is sitting at a mirror and brushing her hair. And I talked about the crackle, the cracks of the static electricity as she was brushing the hair. And I was learning then, you see, that a detail can carry more weight than just this is a piece of the story. It becomes an image. It says something about the character of the one who's doing it, and that's what this woman was in my story. She was sharp with her words, sharp with her attitude, and sharp with her husband. Now, would I have known that except for Wangerin can write the eyes out of a turkey? You hardly know, and you don't have to be a teacher, you hardly know what an offhand comment which you have made can do to the person who hears it. It can change, as they say over and over, a life. I never forgot that because I had entered the pantheon. The pantheon. I could see myself as a writer. From that day, I started sending my stories off, Reader's Digest and so forth. And of course, sometimes you wouldn't even get a rejection. But that was the beginning.